Thank you, and good afternoon, and welcome to the March webinar for the Spring Flood Outlook. My name is Kelsey Engel with the National Weather Service. Today's briefing will be a general overview of the Spring Flood Outlook for the Mississippi Basin, including the Red River of the North and Great Lake drainages. Additional information and forecasts can always be found online at www.weather.gov. Today's presenters are Jim Knoll with the Ohio River Forecast Center, Mike DeWeese with the North Central River Forecast Center, Kevin Lau with the Missouri Basin River Forecast Center, James Paul with the Arkansas Red Basin River Forecast Center, and Katie Landry with the Lower Mississippi River Forecast Center. This webinar is being recorded, and a follow-up email will be sent with information on how to access this recording coming up later today. If you have trouble with the Join Me slides not advancing during the webinar, please close your browser and log in again. The slides from today's presentation have also been emailed earlier this morning. As stated, please hold all questions until the end of the presentation. With that, let's begin with the first presenter, Jim Knoll.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead very similar to a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to be going through basically recent conditions, and then we'll be transferring into the forecast mode and taking a look at the spring flood risk across the Mississippi drainage, including the Red River of the North and the Great Lakes. So to begin with, we're going to be basically looking at a comparison of precipitation here this winter since December 1st. And the graphic on your left is departure from normal precipitation since December 1st up through the last briefing that we had. Then the image on your right will be up through today. And the big things that you will notice over the last 2 weeks is we continue to have below normal precipitation in the yellow and orange across the upper Midwest and northern plains. At the same time, you will see the area of yellow across the Ohio Valley into the lower Mississippi Valley from Arkansas extending up to Kentucky has gone away. We've had a series of storm systems, as we talked about in our last conference call, that would track across the southern and southeastern part of the Mississippi drainage system, and that has produced some heavy precipitation in the form of both rain and snow over the last 2 weeks, yielding now precipitation for the winter above normal in the southern and eastern basin for the most part. As we go on to the next slide, we will look at the winter temperatures. And again, not much has changed in terms of the far western portion of the Mississippi drainage in the upper Missouri Basin, where temperatures remain above normal for the winter season since December 1st. However, if you look at the difference between that left image and the right image, we've had very cold air, as we all know, move across a good portion of the eastern two-thirds of the Mississippi drainage system as well as the Great Lakes. And that has yielded temperatures in that green area now that have gone below normal for about the eastern half of the Mississippi drainage system into the Great Lakes, generally in the 1 to 4 degree below normal range now for the winter season. Now, this is not as cold as last winter when temperatures were in the upper Midwest and Great Lakes were anywhere from 4 to 10 degrees below normal. So again, the temperatures this winter are not nearly as cold, but the last few weeks of very cold weather has certainly cooled us down overall here in the Mississippi drainage system. Moving along to the next slide is the winter snowfall. And again, one of the big changes in the last 2 weeks from that left image to the right image has really been across the lower Mississippi, even a little bit of the Arkansas and Red Basin across Oklahoma and into Arkansas, northern Louisiana, and then extending on into Tennessee, Kentucky, where we have now seen, we've gone basically from below normal snowfall for the winter to above normal snowfall. Now, again, in those southern states, it doesn't take a lot of snow to switch that, as normally a lot of snow does not fall. And again, we just had a storm system move through yesterday and today, laying down a rather substantial snow system in the lower Mississippi into the Tennessee and lower Ohio Valley. Some reports in Kentucky were in excess of 1 foot with this storm after several inches of rain had fallen. Moving along to the next slide, then continuing to talk about the snowfall. On the left image is the snowpack across the Mississippi drainage and the Great Lakes and the Red River of the North on February 17th. And on the right is the snow water content as of this morning. And again, most of the snowpack across the Mississippi drainage system is rather shallow. with water content generally a ½ inch or less. That's a lot of that light gray area that you will see across a good portion of the Missouri and Arkansas and red drainage areas, extending also into a decent portion of the upper Mississippi Valley and Ohio and Tennessee Valley. There is that stripe from Arkansas up into Kentucky where we see some light blues in excess of 1 to 2 inches of water content now in that new snow that has fallen, as well as we have seen some a little bit of a growth in snow water content in northern Illinois and extending over into lower Michigan with some recent snow over the last few weeks. But again, overall, for a large picture, our snow water content, again, is rather shallow and not very significant except in some small areas, and that would, of course, be the typical areas of the northern Rockies as well as near like Lake Superior and in portions of western lower Michigan, and then also in the upper Ohio Basin from northeastern Ohio into northwestern Pennsylvania and southwestern New York. Continuing on, this time of the year, it takes a lot to change soil moisture very quickly. A lot of the ground is frozen across the northern portion of the Mississippi drainage system. We do, however, see some improvement that has occurred from Arkansas and into the Tennessee, Cumberland, and lower Ohio Valley from the recent rainfall. Otherwise, there's just not much difference in the last 2 weeks in the soil moisture conditions. Overall, soil moisture conditions are a little drier than normal from the northern Ohio Valley to the upper Midwest, and just a little bit of wetter than normal in the upper soils in the northern Rockies. Continuing further along into the drought monitor, again, not much change except the improvement that has been occurring from Arkansas on up into the Tennessee and lower Ohio Valley. The drought and dryness continues to slowly expand across the upper Midwest and northern plains with the absence of precipitation over recent weeks in that area. Looking at USGS streamflow conditions, there's been two notable changes over the last couple of weeks. The one is with the heavy precipitation falling in the southeastern Mississippi drainage system from southeastern Oklahoma and portions of Louisiana and Arkansas northeast into Tennessee and Kentucky. We now see at or above normal streamflow conditions in those areas. At the same time, you'll notice the green area from northern Ohio and northern Indiana extending back into Illinois and northern Missouri, and southeastern Iowa has now gone to more of the oranges and reds, indicating our stream flows have switched from near normal conditions to a little bit below normal for this time of the year. Elsewhere, there's been very little change over the last 2 weeks. Taking a look now at the Army Corps of Engineers storage availability for their flood control projects. Bottom line, for all of the divisions covering the Mississippi drainage system, there is ample storage for flood control this spring season, with most divisions indicating about 95 to 99% storage availability. So the majority of the projects have flood control capacity available. Now we're going to go ahead and switch gears into the forecast mode, taking a look at the short term, and then we'll go into the longer climate outlooks before we begin our flood outlooks from the river forecast centers. Over the next 7 days through March the 12th, we expect the jet stream, or the winds aloft, that guide storm systems to remain active in the deep south into the southeastern U.S. and clipping the southeastern Mississippi drainage system, and that would include Kentucky, West Virginia, Tennessee, down into Arkansas, Mississippi, and Louisiana. At the same time, very little precipitation is expected across the northern half of the Mississippi drainage system into the Red River of the North and the Great Lakes, as indicated here. Looking further ahead then from March 12th through March 19th, we do expect a pattern change from the very cold weather of the last 30 days to a average, let's say, above average to much above average temperature regime across pretty much the entire Mississippi drainage system. This will likely allow temperatures to rise into the 50s, 60s, or even 70s from north to south across a good portion of the drainage system, except in the deep snowpack areas near the far northern upper Midwest and into the Great Lakes, where temperatures will likely stay in the 40s, possibly approaching 50. At the same time, that active southern jet stream or storm track will continue from Texas into the Ohio and Tennessee and Cumberland valleys, yielding above normal precipitation across the lower Mississippi into the Tennessee, Cumberland, and lower Ohio valleys from March 12th to March 19th. There may be a very short-term blip of above normal precipitation in the far upper Midwest, but the confidence in that area is not very high, and it is possible that precipitation would remain at or below normal even in that area. Looking further ahead throughout the rest of March, we do expect, because our temperatures have started so cold for the first week of March, even though we're going to see above normal temperatures return to a good portion of the Mississippi drainage system next week into the following week, and then a switch back to colder than normal at the end of the month, overall, for the month of March, temperatures will average at or a little bit below normal across a good portion of the Mississippi drainage system. Outside of the southeastern Mississippi drainage system from Kentucky and West Virginia through Tennessee and Mississippi and Arkansas and Louisiana, where above normal precipitation is expected, most of the rest of the basin, we don't have a high degree of confidence to expect anything outside of about normal. Now, saying that, our climate models do suggest that there may be a slight preference towards the below normal precipitation to continue in the upper Midwest and the northern plains of the Dakotas, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, and the northern Great Lakes throughout this month as well, even though we do not indicate that here. Looking further ahead then for our March through May outlook, we continue to expect a little bit below normal temperatures in the far lower Mississippi drainage and a little bit above normal temperatures in the headwaters of the Missouri drainage. As for precipitation, there's not a high degree of confidence of suggesting anything outside of pretty close to normal precipitation across the basin as a whole at this time. As we continue to kind of wrap up our weather and climate side of this outlook, for the drought, we do expect the drought conditions to continue to develop or expand across the upper Midwest and northern plains over the next few months. At the same time, any dryness that was left in the lower Ohio, Cumberland, and Tennessee valleys is all but gone at this point. We also could see a little bit of an improvement in the dry conditions in portions of Oklahoma and into Colorado, but the persistence of drought in southwestern Oklahoma into northern Texas and that area is likely to continue into spring, as they have been in a long-term drought in that region. Now we're going to go ahead and switch gears to our spring flood outlook and the update over the last 2 weeks. The image on the left that you will see on your screen is the outlook that we issued on Friday, February 20th. And then on the right image is our 50% chance or greater of flooding map issued as of today, March the 5th. These outlooks are very similar in most portions of the Mississippi drainage system, including the Red River of the North and the Great Lakes. The one exception is in portions of Kentucky and Tennessee and down into a little bit of Arkansas, where we have seen that more active weather pattern over the last few weeks, which has influenced our soil moisture conditions, making our conditions wetter, and therefore attributing to a little bit of increased risk. You will notice a couple dots now that are colored in Arkansas and Kentucky that have gone from the oranges into the red category, or moderate flooding expected as we go through spring. Now we're going to transition to each of the river forecast centers and go in more detail, and we will begin by starting in the Ohio River Basin. In the Ohio River Basin, we do expect about normal flood risk, which means minor to some moderate flooding is possible through the spring flood season. In our northern Ohio Basin, extending from northern Indiana across northern Ohio into western Pennsylvania, we do expect the snowpack to melt over the next 1 to 2 weeks. In addition, any rainfall that does come up could enhance problems because we still do have iced-over rivers. These iced-over rivers could cause some ice jams if we do get rain on top of those iced-over rivers. In Indiana, we do expect minor flooding, especially across the upper Wabash into the Maumee Basin. However, this is typical for spring flooding. In Ohio, western Pennsylvania, and southwestern New York, we do expect minor flooding across the Maumee, the Muskingum, the upper Allegheny basins, and the Lake Erie drainage systems. However, again, most of this is expected to be minor, and that would be typical or seasonal type flooding. Going on to the next slide, in the southern Ohio drainage system, we do have ongoing flooding from recent rain and snow. However, we do expect additional rainfall, as we showed in previous slides, as we go over the next several of weeks. At this time, we do expect minor flooding across the White and Wabash basins of Indiana and across the Wabash and Little Wabash basins of southern and central Illinois and into southwestern Indiana. Further south across Kentucky and Tennessee, where we have had heavier rain and snow, and we do expect that to be the focus area in the Ohio Basin drainage system over the next several weeks, we do expect minor to moderate flood events, including the Green, Kentucky, Licking, Sandy, and Cumberland basins. In addition, in West Virginia, we do expect some minor flooding from snowmelt and rainfall. With all of this said, we do expect a minor flood event across the lower Ohio River itself, extending downstream of Louisville. All of this flooding in the lower Ohio Basin and into the Cumberland Basin is actually considered about normal risk for this time of the year. And finally, here in the Ohio Basin, before we summarize it all up, I do want to highlight what is ongoing currently. We did have a 2 to 4 inch rain event move across the southern half of the basin over the last few days, in addition to a snowpack that was melted, and then we added new snowpack back into that southern basin, making for a very complicated forecast. As this image indicates, the areas colored in orange indicate minor flooding, and the areas colored in red indicate moderate floods that are forecast across the southern Ohio Basin. This is in particular across portions of West Virginia into Kentucky. Most of these floods are considered the 1 to 5 year return type floods. However, a few points of those moderate flood events are considered 5 to 10 year type events. And we do encourage you to monitor later forecasts from the National Weather Service Local Weather Forecast Office and the Ohio River Forecast Center. And you can do that by going to weather.gov and also weather.gov/OHRFC. So in summary, for the Ohio and Cumberland River basins specifically, we do expect mostly minor flooding this spring across portions of Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Tennessee. Further to the north, there is a possibility of some ice jams across northern Indiana into northern Ohio and northwestern Pennsylvania if we get timely rains with that ice breakup. Snowpack is expected to continue to melt in the Ohio Basin over the next 1 to 2 weeks, except for the far eastern basin in the highest terrain. Overall, the risk is considered now about normal for the Ohio Basin into April and May, which would mean mostly minor to some moderate floods are possible. And rainfall and thunderstorms in the future will be our primary flood threats. And with that, now I'm going to turn it over to Mike Deweese at the North Central River Forecast Center to talk about the upper Midwest and Great Lakes.
Thank you, Jim. Good afternoon, everyone. So we'll move into the northern part of the country right now, and in contrast to the Ohio River Basin and the East Coast basins that have had a really active winter season, we've enjoyed a relatively mild winter up here in the northern part of the country. If you look at our current snow water equivalent, that's the liquid water content in the snowpack, you'll see a lot of orange values of typically an inch or less. And while on a relative scale that may be a bit above normal in some of the southern basins in Illinois and Missouri, as you move further north, we're well below normal snowpack conditions in the northern plains of North Dakota through most of Minnesota and actually extending all the way across central Wisconsin and into northern lower Michigan. So that's good news for us in terms of spring flood risk. The one area where you see the blue colors and a little bit higher snow water amounts is in the Michigan UP, which is pretty typical for that part of the country. They get a lot of lake effect snow. So again, it's just normal snow conditions for that part of the country. So we'll go to the next slide and look at the Great Lakes basins. You can see as we look towards the western part of the Great Lakes in the Wisconsin region, really varies somewhere between normal to slightly below normal flood risk. We do have some fairly wet soil moisture conditions and a little better snowpack in the northern part of Wisconsin, but as you move further to the west, we get into that dry region. If you remember the slide that Jim showed previously looking at the drought, that drought area, the dry area of soil moisture is starting to expand further to the east and is now moving into Wisconsin a little bit. So that's reflected in the outlook risk. And then as we move into both lower and northern Michigan, basically a normal flood risk for this time of year. The one caveat, especially in the Michigan basins where we've got some snow that we expect to remain for the foreseeable future, is going to be the future rainfall conditions. So that's something we'll have to watch. But again, it's typically a normal condition for this time of year. So we'll move on to the west now. If we look into the Hudson Bay drainage in the northern plains of North Dakota and western Minnesota, we'll start on the west side in the Souris River Basin. We've got fairly normal snowpack, especially in the northern part of the basin along the Canadian border and up into the Canadian portion of the Souris. But as you move further south, then we start to drop off in our snowpack this year. So overall, it presents a normal flood risk for the Souris River at this time. And then as you move over into the Red River, which has frequently been a high-risk area for us, this year it's the opposite condition. We're well below normal. We have below normal soil moisture conditions and much below normal snowpack. That's all good for the flood risk in the area. We do still have some fairly substantial frost depths, frozen ground in the region, but the fact that we've got dry soil moisture and that we've got shallow snowpack on top of the ground is a good indication that that frost shouldn't persist for too long once we get into a melt period. So overall, we're well below normal risk when we move into the Red River. Then we'll move on into the upper portion of the Mississippi Basin. Really two different regions here that we're focused on. As you start into the headwaters of Minnesota and Wisconsin, and as far as now into northern Iowa, as that drought area continues to expand, we're really looking at below normal risk this year. Again, we've had dry soil conditions going into the fall, well below normal winter precipitation in that area. That's all good news for us, and we're not too concerned about that area at this point. As you move further south, we get into the southern half of Iowa, Missouri, and into Illinois. They've actually had above normal precipitation, and they've actually got some frost, frozen ground conditions extending all the way as far south as St. Louis this year. So that's something that we'll have to be aware of. But with the lack of any significant precipitation in the forecast and relatively shallow snowpack in those regions, I think that's not going to last for too long. But overall, a relatively normal flood risk in the mid-Mississippi Valley. If you look a little further to the east in northern Indiana, around the Chicago region, a little bit higher than normal flood risk just because of some of the snow conditions, and that kind of is reflected as it's adjacent to the Ohio Valley there where they've had all the activity. But overall, it's probably more of a near normal to a slightly above normal flood risk. So just to summarize the conditions here, I mentioned the soil moisture conditions are relatively dry, especially over the northern latitude basins and the Mississippi headwaters. The biggest change we see since our last outlook 2 weeks ago is the fact that we are expecting temperatures to warm starting early next week and produce active snowmelt across the region, and we expect that to continue through the remainder of the week. So I would anticipate by the end of next week, much of that snowpack will be melted over a good portion of our area. We'll still have a little snow probably remaining up in the Michigan UP and northern lower Michigan up in the forested region. But when you look at the snow map by the end of next week, a lot of that will be gone. So with that fact, we don't expect a big risk from snowmelt this year. So any significant flooding at this point is probably going to be dependent upon any springtime rainfall. And again, we don't see any big weather patterns that would produce heavy rainfall in the foreseeable future. So that's all good for us. We do see warming temperatures, but from our perspective, it's a really favorable melt pattern, more of a slow, steady snow melt rather than a big rapid warm-up and everything melts at once. So again, that's going to be favorable for our flood risk. Then, sorry, I lost my slide for a moment. So just to summarize the whole region here, near normal chances of flooding this year across the mid-Mississippi Valley in Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, even into southern Michigan. And as you move further north into the upper Midwest, region-wide below normal chances from North Dakota through Minnesota and a good portion of Wisconsin this year. So that wraps it up for the North Central Basin, and at this time I'll turn it over to Kevin Lau to talk about the Missouri River Basin.
Thank you, Mike. Welcome, everyone. A lot of similarities between Mike's talk and mine. I will start off by saying that in general, the National Weather Service is projecting a below normal risk for flooding within the Missouri Basin this spring. First of all, we'll take a look at the mountains, and then we'll talk about the plains. So this first slide, looking at the left-hand plot, this shows the mountainous basin snowpack conditions in percent of normal snow water equivalent. Snowpack conditions in the mountains can be categorized as near average to maybe a bit below average in the mountainous west, with the exception of the North Platte, where its higher elevation snowpacks are below average. The March water supply forecast developed by the Natural Resources Conservation Service and collaborated with our office will be issued next week. And so the summary graphic you see on the left is about a month old. It's the February water supply forecast, and it depicts conditions as of February the 1st. And it suggests an average mountain snowmelt runoff season in 2015 overall, with the North Platte contribution being below normal. Preliminary March numbers, even though the March outlook won't be issued again until next week, but preliminary March numbers indicate not much change from the map you see for February. That is, we'll be looking at near normal stream flow volumes coming from the Yellowstone, the Milk, and the South Platte basins, below normal for the upper Missouri, and well below normal for the North Platte. So in summary, we expect a normal to somewhat below normal mountain snowmelt volume season. The next slide shows a typical snow water equivalent accumulation plot for a snowtail station. And I'm showing this graphic to illustrate about how far along we are in the mountain accumulating season. The light blue trace that you see is the historic accumulation plot for the past 30 years. And for this date, March the 5th, we are typically about 80% of our way through the snow accumulating period. So not to say that things couldn't change in the mountains, but we are closing in on the end of the mountain accumulating season. And so with an average mountain snowpack, or maybe a bit below average, our long-range river stage projections do not indicate the likelihood for significant flooding due to mountain snowmelt alone. Okay, moving on then to talk about the plains. There is a fairly widespread blanket of snow in the plains, as Jim has already alluded to, but it is quite shallow. There's a few places in the lower Milk Basin with 1-inch amounts, some 2-inch snow water reports in the headwaters of the James River in North Dakota, and in the Black Hills there's a couple of 6-inch reports, but in general the majority of the reports in the plains reveals half an inch or less of liquid in the plain snow. As stated during our last call, soil conditions are somewhat of a mixed bag. We believe that the upper few inches are wetter than normal for much of the plains area, but we also believe that the deeper soils are drier than normal. Frozen ground, Mike alluded to this, frozen ground also seems to be playing a role and could play a role in enhancing whatever runoff we have. We saw that a couple of weeks ago in the Hart and the Knife River basins in North Dakota. And so while we do have little plain snowpack, we cannot rule out the possibility for a localized high water event to occur in the northern plains due to any rain that we might receive on frozen ground. Our latest outlooks indicate that widespread flooding in the northern plains is unlikely. I also want to mention here that higher than normal stream flow conditions in the fall, coupled with a series of bitterly cold temperatures alternating with unseasonably warm temperatures, has led to ice formation and breakup on many of the streams already this season. We've seen some high water due to that. However, the associated impacts of these minor flooding events have been localized and relatively minor. Flooding due to river ice breakup will continue to be a threat for the next 2 to 3 weeks. Okay, the next slide depicts the southern part of our basin, the southeastern third of our basin, and this is where convection drives the springtime flooding. Of course, any snow that does build up and quickly melts away does help to keep the soil moisture up, but thunderstorm activity is the primary cause for flooding in the lower portion here of the Missouri Basin. Long-range forecasts developed by our office this week suggest the likelihood of minor to moderate flooding this spring in some areas of eastern Kansas and the state of Missouri. Affected river systems include the Big Blue and the Meridicine in Kansas, the Grand, the Osage, the Sheraton, and the Platte Rivers in Missouri. Many of the smaller tributaries feeding the Missouri River will also experience flooding due to spring rains here in the state of Missouri. And all of this is typical. The Missouri River below Nebraska City may also have a few locations to exceed minor flood stage this spring, and during the next 90 days, that would be toward the end of the next 90 days where we would see or expect to see any flooding along the Missouri River itself. Again, this is not atypical. And so, in summary, we'll go to the summary slide. We do have a below normal risk for flooding almost everywhere within the Missouri Basin. We do have an average to maybe a little below average mountain snowpack. We have a widespread but very shallow plains snowpack. We have had some high water events due to ice jams already this season, and we will continue to monitor that as we go into the thaw. We do not expect any flooding of a significant nature due to mountain snow melt runoff. We could have some localized high water events in the northern plains if we do get some rain while the ground is still frozen, but the time for that is quickly dissipating. If we don't get rain over the next couple of weeks or so, then that threat will be gone. And finally, minor to moderate flooding due to convective activity is likely in eastern Kansas and the state of Missouri, but this is typical. And with that, I'll turn it over to James in the Arkansas.
Thanks, Kevin. Good afternoon, everyone. In the past 2 weeks since our mid-February outlook, the Arkansas Red Basin River Forecast Center's area has received some significant snows along our western border in Colorado. The image in the upper left shows our precipitation estimates since the start of the 2015 water year, October 1st, and it continues to indicate higher than normal amounts in the northwestern portion of the basin. The image in the upper right shows the precipitation that has occurred over the past 2 weeks, although it does not include the the precipitation that fell with the event that occurred yesterday and overnight. This again shows the wetness in the west, while the eastern two-thirds have received less than normal precipitation. You can note the area in southwest Oklahoma where we need precipitation the most continues to receive the lowest totals, even after yesterday's snow event, which added about a quarter to a half inch to much of that area. In the lower left, soil moisture, as estimated from our hydrologic models, shows the wetness in the west and the extreme dryness in the central portions of the watershed. Next slide, please. The heavy snowfall that did occur over the past 2 weeks shows up well in the NRCS's snow water equivalent map for Colorado. In the upper Arkansas River Basin, values have gone from around 90% of average to almost 105% of average. This bodes well for water supply, but it does not pose a significant threat to the normal spring flood risk in that area. The latest reservoir conditions continue to show that most of the lakes that have flood control capabilities have all or nearly all of their flood storage available. Note that this image shows the percent full as reference to their conservation pool levels and not to their flood pool fullness. Next slide. Finally, for our long-range outlook, this map shows a few locations in the eastern portion of our basin continue to indicate a greater than 50% chance of minor to moderate flooding through May, but this is typical with respect to how often they've flooded in the past. The flood risk is considered to be near normal for much of the Arkansas Red Basin. The only exception is in the drought-stricken areas of western Oklahoma, where the flood risk is below normal. And with that, we'll go to Katie at the Lower Mississippi RFC.
Thank you, James. To start off, we're going to show the precipitation comparison from what we showed 2 weeks ago and then what we've seen over the past 2 weeks. Looking at the upper left image, this is the 60-day departure from normal that we showed 2 weeks ago with the precipitation deficit throughout western Tennessee, eastern Arkansas, and northern Mississippi. And looking at the current 14-day observed precipitation that was taken yesterday, you can see most of that area received about 2 to 8 inches of precipitation over the past 2 weeks. This graphic doesn't account for the precipitation that occurred over the past 24 hours, but we did see a nice swath of 1 to 3 inches across the central portion of the LMRC area, going from southern Arkansas up through northern Mississippi, western Tennessee, into Kentucky, and then also seeing some heavier precipitation up in our eastern Tennessee and North Carolina, Virginia areas. Going to the next slide, looking at the 14-day average stream flow comparison, compared to what we showed 2 weeks ago, the much below normal stream flow conditions in northern Mississippi and then over into western Tennessee has greatly improved to normal to above normal stream flow conditions. And then in the area in Arkansas where we're seeing slightly below, we do expect this to improve over the next couple of days and into the next couple of weeks as we get that recent snow melt that we had over the past 24 hours, snowpack melting in northern Arkansas and southern Missouri. And then going to the next slide. For the short-term flood potential, we are currently seeing some flooding going across the LMRC area. Right now we've got minor flooding across the majority of the area, with the exception up into our mountain areas over in Virginia and North Carolina area, where we got hit pretty good. We're showing minor, moderate, and major flooding up in that area. Those are some of our flashier points. We do expect those stream flows. This does account for the next 24 hours of precipitation, which Jim had showed the 7-day up in that area with another inch of precipitation, and that is accounted for in these forecasts. Currently we're seeing some minor flooding on some roadways, but expecting some moderate to major flooding just in that area. Once the water recedes in this area, we do expect the flood potential to return back to an average flood potential for that area. As far as the Mississippi River goes, we do see a slug of water coming down from the Ohio and Tennessee Valley upstream. We're expecting Cairo to get above flood stage by around March 16th, and that we do expect minor flooding on the Mississippi River, but that is seasonal for this time of year. and we will be monitoring the conditions along the Mississippi. But as far as the rest of the lower Mississippi River tributaries, we were just seeing some minor flooding currently going on. This slide showing the long-term flood potential for the LMRC area. As you can see, most of the area we're expecting seasonal, well actually for the whole area we're seeing seasonal flood potential with minor flooding occurring over the majority of the area, and then just a few points reaching up to moderate flooding along the Big Black and the Cache River in in Arkansas, excuse me. But as far as the potential for the Mississippi River goes, just what we're calling for is an average flood potential given the upstream conditions on the Ohio and Upper Miss and Tennessee River valleys. But so for the whole LMRC area, just expecting a seasonal flooding due to our spring rainfall events. Next slide, please. So in summary, the drier conditions that we were seeing over the past month for the north-central portion of the LMRC area has greatly improved thanks to our precipitation events over the past 2 weeks. And with that, we're still expecting a seasonal flooding potential along the Mississippi River, given the upstream conditions. And then for the majority of the LMRC area with the tributaries, still expecting the seasonal normal flood potential, with the exception of our mountainous areas and our flashier points that are expecting our moderate to major flooding over the next couple of days. But once those rivers do recede, we do expect an average potential to return to that area. And then in conclusion with that, we're just expecting the flood potential to be driven mainly from individual convective rainfall systems as we go into the middle of spring and end of the spring. We're not expecting much of precipitation for the area over the next couple of days, which will over the next week or so, which will help our flood current conditions right now to allow for the rivers to recede. So with that, I will pass it back to Jim.
Thank you, Katie. So in summary for the Mississippi drainage as a whole, including the Red River of the North and the Great Lakes, for the spring, we are considering a near-normal flood risk across much of the central and southern sections of the Mississippi drainage system. And for the northern sections, especially in the Missouri and the Upper Miss, Red River of the North, we are expecting actually normal or below normal flood risk conditions. Overall, normal flood risk would mean we should expect mostly minor to some moderate floods. Snowmelt is not expected to be a big contributor this spring to flooding, and the spring rains will be needed in much of the basin to drive any flooding. And the National Weather Service will continue to monitor these situations in terms of future precipitation, snowmelt, and all that as we go through March, April, and May.